Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today, we're wrapping up Book 5 of the Politics. We're looking at Chapter 12, which is odd. Why? It's a very short chapter. It returns us to the theme, a theme that's hinted on in the question of longevity, regime longevity. It opens up on the question of longevity of certain type of regimes. Now, the last two chapters, 10 and 11, which was almost like a miniature discussion of monarchy. It was a discussion of monarchy. Now, where, it's almost like a kind of that was a digression to it. It dealt with the question of how does monarchy, which combines tyranny, it offers an analysis of both kingship and tyranny, how it's has suffers metabolic change, and what is the reason for this, what destroys it, what things, the forces that lead to change in that regime, that destructive change of the regime, how the regime falls apart in that sense, or changes to another regime, or another leader in that sense. What happens to why leaders lose power, and actually, therefore, is a more its tone is different in character from the previous discussions earlier. Particularly 5, 6, and 7, which looked at the various regimes, the political regimes, and how they change and why they change. And then the 8 and 9, which dealt with the question of how to preserve regimes, both in specific terms and general, and in general, uh, in general terms of specific regime types, how to each one. We dealt with that, and let's go look at those chapters. Now, 10 and 11 was kind of a weird thing. It kind of gave us looking at not, you know, and here I think some comments by um, what's his name, Michael Davis is right here. That Michael Davis suggests that the thematic theme of this is almost a kind of a gets to the heart of politics, ruling, what ruling is, right? And why, how do you hold power? How do you maintain it? How do you preserve it? Echoing very much what Machiavelli does in his Prince, right? This is even though it's not echoing, it says it first, okay? Machiavelli, if anything, Machiavelli's echoing him, Aristotle here. Um, so why don't we end there? Why do we get this chapter? Why is chapter 12 necessary? Well, I argue that it's necessary because it's a theme. If that is a digression, then we haven't got. Then why did we have this at all? Couldn't we left it at change and preservation, right? Well, one of the themes we haven't dealt with that to close the whole question up was longevity. That how do you know the thing that you have not addressed on the question of change and preservation? Okay, so let's look at this. All change can either be for the better or worse, right? Change is not change. Change is directing someplace. Changed for the better, and if it's continual change, we call that progress, right? Progress is not simply something automatic. It is basically a form of change. It is a series of change that continually gets better and beneficial. But there can also be unbeneficial, non-beneficial change, harmful change, right? That's the whole point that we have to understand metabolic change. And that's why metabolic is a question here for regimes, has to be understood that change can be for the better or for the worse. And here, mostly he's saying about the change he's looking at is for the worse in the sense that it causes the regime to no longer be able to maintain itself, to preserve itself, and that raises the question of, well, what is the natural longevity of regimes? And this is where that kind of question is really brought up. Now, he seems to always say, and he's dropped this elsewhere, that democracies tend to be the longer living. democracies tend to be these more stable, and because it's more stable, they tend to last longer. Okay, that's kind of an almost argument. Now, that's the unsaid argument. Okay? He's hinted at that else before. Um, Now we get in chapter 12 the question of longevity, and he addresses the question of longevity. So let's look at it. We'll start out like that. He goes, oligarchies and tyrannies are, however, the most short lived regimes. So he says that oligarchies and tyrannies are, short lived regimes. The tyranny of the oligarch's son and that of oligarchs himself on Sicilon, existed for the longest period. It lasted 100 years. Okay, so this is the longest lasting tyranny, right? The reason for this was that they treated, in fact, this is interesting that in many ways, they treated the ruled moderately and in many respects were slaves to laws. Also, because Callisthenes was a warlike sort, he could not readily be held in contempt, and in many respects, they sought popularity by acts of concern. Now, okay, let's go look at 117 for a second. Uh, um, in other words, the tyranny of oligarchy as it was instituted in 630. Citilenes was his great grandson, right? This is from Herodotus' book 6, Herodotus' history. So, what is it saying here? In other words, he says that this is lasted for a long time, this tyranny, right? It is said of Callisthenes, at any rate, that he gave a crown to the person who denied him the victory in a competition. Some assert that the statue of a seated person in the marketplace there is a representation of the one who gave this judgment. Okay, in other words, someone in a competition between him and someone else, someone gave the uh, 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 denied him a victory. Right, the judge who denied him a victory, he gave a crown to that person. And asserts and some assert the statue of a seated person in the marketplace, just idea, is representation of the one who gave the judgment of that he should win or the last one, right? So this is the idea that this is his. He defers to the tyrant who had the power doesn't use it to for his own benefit. They also assert that Pisteris once put up with being summoned as a defendant in a suit before the Areopagus. Now, this is in other words, this is a discussion of this is Aristotle's Athenian polity, right? Uh, uh, in the 16th chapter, I think, and then Plutarch's Life of Solon himself is discussed, mentioned. Um, so, therefore, this is the longest one. This idea, this 100 years. This is the city lasted. This regime lasted at uh, 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 Ciceron, 100 years. Okay? The second longest was that of the Crispicids at Corinth. This went on for 73 years and 6 months. Calypsis was tyrant for 30 years, Persander for 40 and a half, and Pasemelikios, the son of Gorgas, for 3 years. The reason are the same in this case. Crippus was popular leader and went up without a bodyguard throughout his entire rule. Pisander, although a tyrannical sort, was the same time warlike. So let's look at these notes. 19. Now this is the half, accepting half in place of a titter 4. So this is a textual note. But the next one is 120. The tyranny of Corinth was instituted in about 657 BC. And this is talked about Herodotus' book 5 of his history and Aristotle's an Aristotle fragment. This is the fragment in the Rose edition of fragments. Um, So, in other words, this is the second longest, right? The Corinthian tyranny. The third was that of the Pistelids at Athens, though it was not continuous. Pristatitus twice went into exile and tyrant, so that in 33 years he was tyrant for 17 of these. His son ruled for 18, so altogether it existed for 35 years. Again, this is Athenian Constitution, chapter 17 and 19, right? The history of this. So, okay, those are the third last, right? Now he continues. Of the remaining, the longest was the connected with Hero and Gelos at Syracuse. Yet not even these lasted long, only 18 years together. Geo was tyrant for 7 years and died in the eighth. Hero for 10 years. Thrasybulos went to exile after 10 months. Most tyrannies have been quite short lived, however. So, tyrannies at Syracuse, again, see chapter 10:31 earlier. This entire passage, 1 through 6, has often been bracketed by editors as interpolation, right? This is how we get this weird thing of this chapter. This is why it's very frustrating. And we get this, therefore, this ends. This stops the discussion. This is why some people even argue that, oh no, this whole thing is this whole section, paragraphs 1 through 6. This is the something that's been here. Maybe this should be someplace else. So we get this idea that regimes have a length, and he focuses on notice what he's silent about. If we're going to talk about if we're going to do this, that he needs to talk about democracies and polities. But he talked about that earlier. He's hinted earlier about democracies and popular regimes, popular governments, democracies, and we want to call polity or regime called regime, right? Again, this is another name for democracies. These are rule of the people. Okay, remember that this is that even there's a whole argument even here, and I talked about this many times in many different places earlier in this discussion when we look at chapter 4, that this whole politea regime called politea is a mix. It's a mess. It's intentionally messy. It's tend to confuse. It's written. It's aimed, I suspect, mostly people who don't like democracy. So he needs to give a. He needs. There's a philosophical following Plato. There's kind of almost a there's a suspicion of democracy among the educated. Now this is the question: is who is being written for? I think here he's writing this for the intellectuals. This is what my argument is. Aristotle is not writing this for political people. He's writing it for philosophers, and the philosophers are no friends of democracy. Okay, they look at democracy and they look at it and they see its defects and they think it is a defective regime. They look at the people and they see their ignorance. Aristotle has been constantly arguing against that view here in the politics text. My argument is he's always been pointing out that the collective aspects of the people together are often even better than the wise man. Okay, in other words, this is not. In other words, political life is not about philosophizing. It's about living one life and living the community's life, and that the question is there's a kind of question: does the philosopher is the philosopher really his knowledge and his excellence in his thing really as great as the every other person? Okay, the collect or yes, that this person may have better individually may be better to do it, but collectively not. Okay, that the collectives outdo him or equal him or outdo him. Okay, and that's the problem here. In this sense, so we get this discussion of longevity. Then, how long does a regime last? And he's silent about the democracy. Why? Well, because he said elsewhere through this book that they tend to be the most moderate regimes. And most moderate regimes, unless some extraordinary event happens, that destroys it. Now, or maybe that over in this course of event, that once it goes into an urban democracy, it becomes unstable. It becomes least democratic and becomes tyrannical and doesn't last long, right? In other words, there's this in that not in but once a city becomes urban democracy, and the nature of urban democracy, and the populations grow and they get dependent on, they're easily more poorer and poorer and poorer. The poor increase, and the poor are easily manipulated by the demagogues, the poor also become overly slavish, and therefore no longer respect the laws, as the warning in Book 3 about that. Their wisdom. Remember, the defense of the wisdom of the many in Book 3, chapter 11, 12, and 13, only emerges when the many are not slavish. Okay, and what happens is that poverty is a mechanism of making the many slavish. So the excessive poverty may create a class who are successfully, and if they're the most powerful, the flatterers will manipulate. This is the demagogues, right? The demagogues or political leaders, seeing that they're most powerful, seeing that they are so powerful that they need them to keep power, right, or get into power, will use them, and therefore that's what leads to the instability and tyrannical character of the last democracy, right? Therefore, there is the two-sided character of the democratic longevity that has to be addressed, and he's addressed it earlier, both in the discussion of political change, saying that the most dangerous thing, remember in Book 5, Chapter 5 of Book 5, it's demagogues or leaders are the reason why that democratic regimes will collapse or lead to revolution. Okay, lead to change. A collapse of the regime or change that destroys the democratic regime. Okay, now here is my break. Let's look at the next thing, because this is the break. He says, the things connected both with regimes and with monarchies that lead to their destruction and their preservation has nearly all been spoken of. So he wraps up again saying that we've done this. He says, but now, here's the thing. Now, but then he gives an example of the problem, though. This is the next problem. He says, but now in the Republic, there is a discussion of revolution, of political change, by Socrates. But he does not argue rightly. What? Oh, so Socrates now this is 123. This is Republic 5. This is the discussion of change, political change in the Republic. This is that famous discussion of the cycles of regimes, right? The cycles of regimes. And he's going to argue that the discussion of revolution in books, I think book 7, 8. Hold on. Okay. Yeah, it's back to 5. It's book 8, starting 8, 9. Right. It goes 9 is the tyrant. Right. So that we have the discussion of the cycle of regime, starting with the aristocracy, or the best regime, right? The aristocracy of the ruler, the philosopher king, right? That's not what the philosopher king; it's aristocracy, right? So therefore, that's it's interesting itself. The aristocracy that turns into oligarchy, that then turns into, he gets this account both in terms of the political structure and into the echoing of this in terms of family too. The changes in the family, father to son, the relationships between husband, wife, father, son, leading to the cycles of, and then the change of the regime. Right? There's first the fight within the family, then the change in the society. Of Book 8, right? That's the whole cycle of what's going on in that, right? So therefore, we have this discussion here, because in the case of the regime that is best and first, he does not speak of a metavale proper to it, or change, a revolution proper to it. There's no revolution that leads to it, in that sense, right? Or there is, the idea is that it's when you kill the adults, or take all the children by themselves and get rid of the parents. So is that really, how do you, in other words, he does not speak of a revolution proper to it. In other words, that's beneficial to it. In other words, that regarding it, of that, that's this best regime. He talks about he asserts the reason is nothing. He asserts the reason is that nothing is lasting, but everything undergoes change over a certain cycle. And the beginning point, the RK, lies in those things where a basic ratio of 4 or 3 yoked to 5 produce two modes, saying that this happens when the numbers of this figure is cubed. The assumption being that nature sometimes brings into beings persons who are mean and beyond education. So if uh, again, so what is 23 is gets us the discussion of that. Here is this is the whole soul neck. This the allusion is to the notorious riddle of the nuptial number, which Socrates claims should define the periods for breeding in his best regime. Interpretations of the mathematics involved is highly uncertain. In other words, this is the interpretation of the mathematics involved here that Aristotle is giving is kind of problematic, he says, or uncertain. But in other words, this is the thing. He argues that there's something about the nature of numbers. That Plato argues that there's the nature of numbers, and therefore, because the nature of numbers is a certain way, that nothing is uncertain, even at the level of theory or practice. In other words, this idea, um, and that therefore everything is uncertain because there's this cycle, and that almost it's inevitable. That, in other words, that it's the beginning point, the arche of the change, the mental revolution or the change, is what? It's the basic ratio of 4 to 3 yoked to 5, produced two modes. In other words, it produced two modes of things, saying that this happens when the number of this figure is cubed, right? This again, nuptial number, right? This this is the thing, and that persons this creates a situation. Children are going to be born who are not problematic if it's not done. If it's something's not done right, right? Who are mean. In other words, they're not the best, and they're beyond education. They're unvirtuous. They have, they lack virtue. They're impossible for virtue on that side. They, now, in saying this, he is perhaps not wrong, for there may be persons who are incapable of being educated and becoming spudaios, becoming spudaios, excellent men, right? The idea of spudaios, right? It might be impossible for becoming spudaios. That may be true. This is true. He's not wrong about that. But why should this be a sort of change particular to the regime he calls the best, rather than belonging to all the others and to all persons coming from an existence? In other words, why is this only true about the best regime and not true of all regimes? So this is interesting. Now the question is, maybe it is true about all regimes, okay, the nature of selection. But he speaks about this only because this question is arising. Is literally the number. This number issue is about the nuptial number, the breeding, the breeding campaign, the breeding situation, right? That is only possible in this best regime. But if that's the reason, then isn't it more true? It's not relative. It's true simply. Okay. So he says, okay, he's not wrong about this, but this is more of a general statement about the problems of human beings, the variety of human beings. About and this will be true of all regimes, not only that regime, but any regime in that sense, right? In other words, the problem that there'll be people who are not capable of being excellent. There's always going to be people emerging that are not going to be able to be good and excellent. Okay, right? Not so serious, budios. And this is and it. Sorry, I'm just my dyslexic is sitting here. And is it because of time through which he says all things undergo revolution? And it is because of time through which he says all things go through change, revolution, metabai, that even things not beginning simultaneously should undergo revolution simultaneously. In other words he's questioning this idea of simultaneous revolution, the cycle. This he says that time is the reason why this is happening. Time. Is it and it is because of time things go through this change? Then and they go and although not beginning simultaneously, go through revolution, change simultaneously. If something came into being on the day before the turning point, will it undergo change simultaneously? In other words, something just came into being just before the turning point. That turning point moment, is it going to come automatically go into revolution? In other words, or is time is the sequence of change determined by time independently of the situation when a thing comes in? Okay, this is a riddle. This is a question. He doesn't think that the Plato's justification of the Republic here, Socrates' account there. No, he says Socrates. Socrates' discussion of the cycle of regimes, makes sense. You kind of, in addition to these things, what is the reason for what is the reason for its undergoing metabole revolution change in the direction of the Spartan regime? In other words, why does it go? Why does this best regime go to the Spartan regime? That's right. Remember, it goes from aristocracy to timocracy, which is the rule of the warriors, right? The rule of the spirit. Why does it go from this best to this? Why not something else, right? He goes, all regimes undergo revolution more frequently into their opposite than into a regime neighboring sort. In other words, this is his Aristotle's point is it's not going to be the regime that's closest to it that regimes will change into, but rather the opposite. The opposite things. Regimes go to its opposite. When there's going to be change, if there's going to be a change of the regime, it often will go to its opposite. What the principle or what the thing was, right? This is his point about that the opposite of the more moderate democracy is the less moderate democracy. The same thing oligarchy. The change of from the more the oligarchy that is kind of like okay inclusive to the one that's exclusive, increasingly exclusive, right? Based on the principle of that. Then the change from democracy to the opposite, his argument was, well, then it goes from either to democracy to oligarchy to democracy, or to oligarchy to in many sense, oligarchy and tyranny are similar. Democracy will go from oligarchy, tyranny, and democracy, right? From oligarchy to either popular rule or aristocratic rule, right? Or something like that. In other words, it doesn't necessarily always go to its opposite in that sense. It goes to its opposite. Sorry, I'm saying. All regimes undergo change, metabole, more frequently into their opposite than into a regime of the neighboring side. So it's more frequently. In other words, it's not. It automatically does that. It's not. It's more. It's going to be. It's more frequently, more likely to. Right. It's still possible to go into another sort, but it's rare, less frequent. The same argument also applies to the other revolutions. He asserts that from the Spartan regime, there is a change in the direction of oligarchy, and from this to democracy, and from democracy to tyranny. Right. This is the cycle that he. This is the famous cycle. Now, there's no argument. What is the cycle? This is Socrates' account of the cycle in Book 8 becomes very powerful in the history of political thought. Polybius, I think it's in Book 8. I forget Book 6, Book 8 of the history. It's where he gives the account of this the Roman regime, and he gives this famous cycle. And that there's a whole word in our Greek philosophy about this coming from this cycle of regimes that sorry, I hate. This is Polybius's line. Anacyclosis. Anacyclus. This is Polybius will skip this concept, but this is what maybe this is what you could call this cycle. Now, some scholars argue that Polybius doesn't suffer, so Polybius' account would not be susceptible to the same criticism of Aristotle. Well, yes, he would. That is a cycle. I think they're misreading what's saying here. While focusing in on Plato's account, because Polybius is not counted. If Aristotle was alive and was writing this at the same time Polybius was and knew Polybius's argument, um, he would have attacked it, being a similar argument as this. In fact, Polybius' account becomes very important to shaping things like Machiavelli's account of cycles too. That just shapes political thinking. Polybius's cycle is something that shapes Western political thinking. And this again, Polybius gets this from Plato. And this is a thing. This idea that revolution is change is inevitable. It's like this cycle of this. We kind of get this also kind of in Hegelian dialectics, right? This is how the Marxists think. So the Marxists think that there's this kind of inevitability of progress and a change, that things must go a certain time. And what Aristotle's doing here, he's questioning that completely. The attack on Plato is implicitly an attack on anyone who argues that there's an inevitable course of political change. There is some things that are likely towards and goes towards, but it's going to be determined by the regime in the particular circumstances that rather than things else. Now let's go continue here. Sorry about the thing here. So let's go. He goes. Let's go to the next line, right? Yet revolution may also go the other way, from the rule of the people to oligarchy, for example. And this is more likely to happen than revolution or change in the direction of monarchy, right? Further, in the case of tyranny, he does not say either if there will be a revolution or if there will not. What is the reason for this? Or into which sort of regime? In other words, we get the assumption here, but then this is the famous line: "The tyrant brings the philosopher." Right? This is that in the laws where there's, I think, give me the young tyrant. Right? Um, this is the problem here, that the Platonic thing doesn't cycle out. And there's this cycle inevitable like this, and that the question here is there a connection between the tyrant and the philosopher? This, again, given Plato's attempt, the reality of what Plato attempted to do in here, Dion, right, going to Syracuse to kind of educate a tyrant, right? That failed attempt. Once he gets there, he gets prison. Right? Uh, um, uh, Again, I think this is the two. Remember Xenophon's hero, or the hero, which is about Tyrannos, on tyrant, right? Xenophon gives us this dialogue not between a philosopher and a tyrant, but a poet, Simonides, which is Plato's, Aristotle's, not so sorry, Aristotle's, Socrates is the poet that Socrates favors the most. So there's kind of a Socratic position, dialogue, a semi-Socratic poet. Oh, the poet Socrates liked, and a tyrant. Okay, that's Xenophon, and we get Plato go trying to do that, right? This is something maybe a criticism of Plato in that sense, right? Saying that, oh, why are you not talking about the change of tyranny? Like I did it, I just talked about it, and I even like doing something similar to talking about this, right? About preserving, in books. Chapter 11 is very similar. Of chapter 11 of 5 is very similar to Xenophon's hero, right? About arguing about how to preserve tyranny. So it's a wink to knowing this, but then this is a criticism that you're not talking about this sort of regime, right? He goes, uh, 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 if there, in other words, if it will be a revolution, for if it will not, what is the reason for this? Or into which sort of regime will this tyranny go? And your Marta goes, the reason for this is that it would not have been easy for him to say, that it is impossible to determine, and it is impossible to determine. According to him, it should be the direction of the first and best, for in this way there would be a continuous circle. Right? This idea, there's this circle. In fact, this is why revolution is a bad word here, because revolution in English has this idea of like this. This is why metaboe means, I think revolution implies this cycle, a circle return like this cycle. Um, Metaboe means this change, a change that go from one to some. It is a change. It is no there's no revolution implies a cycle. Change is just a change, better or worse. Um, but tyranny also undergoes revolution and tyranny, as he talked about it earlier, right? Tyranny also undergoes revolution into tyranny. For example, the one of at Ceron, where the tyranny of Myron was replaced by that of Cleisthenes, and oligarchy, and into oligarchy like that of Ariston and Tukelos, and into democracy like that of Gleo and his family at Syracuse, and into aristocracy like that of Callistonus and Laomedon, and at Carthage. Right, this is again not 25. Right, this is that famous thing. Now he gives it this. For Cleisthenes was apparently the brother of Meron. Nothing is known of Antylon. Aristotle, in chapter 10, Aristotle indicates that the regime succeeding Gleno's tyranny was an aristocracy or a regime rather than a democracy. So he's a contradict himself. And for Clesos and the Aristotelian fragment at 10, 611 at Rose, right? See this discussion of this, right? But that a tyranny once existed at Carthage is often held to contradict Aristotle in Book 2, Chapter 11, as Carthage. But there, Aristotle seems to be referring to tyrants arising after the establishment of the Republican regime. Loss of the name of the loss of the name of the Carthaginian tyrant in the present passage has often been suspected. In other words, there was a name there, but it's been lost. So he's given this cycle, but how the word tyranny can go into different types. There can also be a change from oligarchy to tyranny, as happened with the most ancient oligarchies in Sicily. To the tyranny of Pesilaus at Leonati, and that of Lycander at Glee, to that of Analaxos at Regula, and similarly in many other cities. Now 26. Pentuus, this is again, this other words, this was mentioned at 10, chapter 10, section, paragraph 6. For Cleander, see Herodotus, book 7. For Anaxes, Herodotus, book 6. 7 also, and this, and then Regulum was actually on the Italian mainland up opposite Sicily, right? So that's there's a little factual error here, right? But maybe his point is that this is a regime of this, right? Another example of that. It is also odd to suppose that there is a revolution in the direction of oligarchy because those holding the offices are greedy and involved in money making, and not because those who are very preeminent by the fact of their property suppose it is not just for those possessing nothing to have a share in the city equal to that of the possessors. In other words, there's that line he goes. Let's look at this. He says, Is it also odd to suppose that there is a change, a revolution, right, in direction of regime, an oligarchy, because those holding offices are greedy and involved in the money making, right? They want more money, and not because those who are very preeminent by the face, by their fact of their property. It is not just that those possessing nothing to have a share in the city equal to those possessors. In many oligarchies, to engage in money making is not permitted, and there are laws preventing this. On the other hand, at Carthage, they engage in money making, though it is run timocratically. Right, this is that weird line, accepting Newman's conjecture timocraxis for Democratus. He's accepting Newman's correction, democratically run. The manuscript, the text of the manuscript is democratically run. I'm going to stick with the manuscript. I think Newman's wrong here. as well as the thematic discussion of Carthaginian regime at 211. It will be natural for Aristotle to use the Platonic term, the argument is, for the conventional aristocracy in this context. No, I think I'm going to disagree. I think that maybe the manuscript may be better off here. I think it may be, though it is more popularly run, democratically run, and have not yet undergone the change, right? The revolution, the change. It is it also odd to assert that an oligarchic city is really two cities of the wealthy and the poor. Now, 28 is again, this is Plato's line to Plato's Republic. Is it also odd to assert that an oligarchic city is really two cities? Why is it odd? Okay. For why should it have this characteristic more than the Spartan or any other regime where all do not possess equal things or are not good men in a similar way? In other words, why is it only true for this and not the other kind of regimes as well, right? Without anyone becoming poor, then without anyone's becoming poorer than before, regimes can nevertheless undergo change from oligarchy to democracy. If the poor become the majority, or from the rule of the people to the oligarchy, if the well-off element is superior to the multitude, while the latter neglects politics, while the former put their minds to it. In other words, what happens is the people, the many, are concerned with the wealthy. That, in other words, that all of a sudden the well-off element is superior to the multitude, and the multitude kind of neglects politics. They don't pay attention to it, and the well-off focuses on politics. That's why the change will happen. So it's the idea of one becomes stronger, one becomes dominant, one puts his energy towards ruling, right? So why is this the case? In other words, in other words, it doesn't lead to one. This doesn't lead. In other words, the argument this leads to this. Why not this leads to that? Okay. Uh, uh, um, though there are many reasons for revolutions occurring from oligarchy, or change occurring from democracy, oligarchy to democracy, he only speaks of one: they're becoming poorer by extravagant living and paying out interest on loans. Right. This is again Republic. Right. This idea, and the assumption being that all or most were wealthy from the beginning. But this is false. Rather, where certain of the leaders have squandered their properties, these engage in sedition. But in the cases where others, nothing terrible happens. And even if it should, change or revolution would not be more likely to occur in the direction of the rule of the people than in another sort of regime, tyranny or a more exclusive oligarchy, right? Um, Further, men engage in stasis, factional conflict, and effect change, revolution in regimes if they have no part in the prerogatives or if they are treated unjustly or arrogantly. Continues this point, right? Even where they have not consumed all their properties on account of the license to do whatever they want, the cause of which he asserts too much freedom. The cause of which he asserts is too much freedom. In other words, he says, no, 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 no. People go to change because they have no part in prerogatives. They want their, or they've been treated unjustly or arrogantly, not because their property is all gone, and the property all gone only because they become more free. And this idea of today, the cause of which they lose all their license to do whatever they want, the cause of which he asserts is too much freedom. Freedom leads us to. That's true. Some cases that might happen, but there are other reasons why change will happen. Although there are many sorts of oligarchies and democracies, Socrates speaks only of revolutions as if there was only one sort of each. In other words, and this is where he ends here. This is that weird thing. The text here is almost certain corrupt. The lacuna probably is marked after usuna property, right? And is done by Shmushmiel and another as the later part of the sentence seem not to refer to transition from oligarchy to democracy, but that of democracy to tyranny, right? The abrupt ending of the book has led suspicion that a number additional tyranny may have lost as well. No, I mean that's true. Things could have been done, but I think the logic is let's continue his thoughts. Let's follow the logic of his position. And the logic of his position is not going to be the thing that I think the Lord and many people thinks here. That he's saying here is that the cycle is not going to go in the direction of this. That it's not that. See the mode of change that Socrates and the Republic indicates isn't inevitable. Isn't inevitable. It could have went other ways. In other words, his story is inevitable because he does it from the. In other words, I would even say that if further, more radical criticism, Aristotle's criticism of the thing, is not seeing the city as an entity, seeing the play of the family as leading to the change in the city, has some merit in it, but not to the same way that he thinks it does. Okay, and that's the criticism here, and that the change is inevitable. The problem here is that his understanding of oligarchy, Socrates and Plato's understanding of oligarchy and democracy only sees it as a unitary form, where that's not true. And therefore, the change of regimes is going to be more dynamic than Socrates accounts for. And this ends this attack on Plato, on this cycle, an attack on any person. I think this is an attack on the inevitability. There's two things that five deals with. The end of five deals with. That this chapter 12 deals with. The first thing is the question of longevity, life of regimes, the lifetime of regimes. And he deals with that. Now, the silence, not dealing with democracy, but he's mentioned it before. We just have to just look at it. Let's go back and think about all the points about what he talked about this in his earlier causes. Gives us enough argument that he's down that he the reader maybe needs to finish this. The reader needs to finish it in their mind. That the incompleteness is not that he doesn't. He's running out of time. We need more time. This is lectures, right? We're out of time. We're running out of time, and oops, sorry, class is over. Students going to be running out of the room, right? That's what's happened, and therefore the argument is not complete. This is why this is the problem of politics. It can go on forever. It should maybe go on. It should be doing. And therefore, we have to look at the patterns. We are engaging in the text constantly. We are engaging it and rethinking it, and we're continuing it and adding to it in our minds. Okay, this is the incomplete idea of here is that the education of the political man, the statesman or the political politician, needs to be constantly continuing. There's no end in that sense. There's not a set of knowledge. Oops, that's all you need to know, and that's it. And I think this is what he's trying to understand about this idea. So that one thing is longevity of regimes, and the second is it's attacking Plato's idea of certainty. There's a cycle. There's no set cycle. Revolution is not simply going to happen. It's there is patterns, but there's not this inevitable, unacceptable. This is a slam, either at progressives, Marxists, or anyone, or even of the idea, even a little bit of Machiavelli and Polybius, that there's inevitability of a cycle. There are some things that change is inevitable, but the cycle by which regimes go, and it might be individualized in my particular circumstances. Well, here ends the book 5. And now we turn next time we meet to the beginning of book 6, which, to be honest, is a problem in itself because 6. Some people argue 6 is a mere appendix, rehashing. I argue it is the thing that he promised to do in book 4 that he never did, which is, okay, how do we establish regimes? How do we establish regimes? And what is very shocking of this is you'll notice, I mean, of the practical regimes in book 4 and also here, democracy and oligarchy will only be discussed in book 6. The regime called regime, so-called polity, aristocracy. Aristocracy will establishment of aristocracy, not a polity or regime called regime, will be established in book 7 and 8, right? Tyranny and kingship are not discussed. We talked about tyranny, book 10, its preservation, that there's no discussion of installing it. Aristotle gives no account. So no account of installing, there's no account of destroying three regimes. One, kingship. His argument is that, sorry, kingship is unreasonable, not going to happen. Human beings, human communities has grown out of that. It's not going to come. It's not going to be instituted. Only in primitive peoples that you get a kingship. Tribal peoples and things that's what. But once as they advance and they become more political and more developed, no going back. That's kind of been an argument too. He's been arguing both 5 and 4. Tyranny, we don't do it because we don't. Not it's not choice worthy. Polity, not possible. Doesn't exist. So only democracy and oligarchy are the regimes he talks about. And 7, a chapter 7 and 8, do we get an aristocracy, the regime that we would pray for. Voila. So we'll see you that then. If you have any questions or comments, please put them below. This is longer than I thought it would be, but if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, if I see them, I will respond to them. If you've liked it, like it. Please like it and share it. Please tell people how good you like what I'm doing here. If you want to do, if you're not subscribed already, you want to continue to subscribe, or you know people who want encourage others to subscribe, please, to our channel. If you know someone else who's not subscribed, please encourage them to subscribe. Come and watch us and get them to join up. It would be good for this to grow a little bit better and be known about. If you didn't like it, okay, don't like it. Okay, you can say why. But if you liked it, share it. Spread it on social media. Spread it to your friends. Another way if you want to follow me on social media, I'm there. I'm more a Facebook person than Twitter. I once in a while, I don't know why Facebook. I'm Boomer Brook. I'm not Boomer. I'm a Gen Xer, but I don't. I try. I'm on Gab and other things, but I don't use it as much. All my social media links are below. As again, noticed about this, so you'll see it there. Whatever. What else? I want to help. Money, man. I'm broke and I'm going to use some money. This has been a weak month. This has really been hurting. This month is, everything hit. I'm going to be hit with the new price. I have to renew my Microsoft subscription. That's going to be blah. And this dollar exchange rate is like, oh, fuck me. Oh, sorry. Ooh, demonetized. Right now, it's just, just slobbering me, and things like that. So that's one way you can help. You want to help? You can subscribe, start Patreon. Now, people say, but you don't do anything there. There's no one there, so it's kind of like I joke about this. Someone says the restaurants, if you see an empty restaurant, no one wants to join. So people look at it, but there's no one there. So of course, empty restaurants is always empty restaurant. No one's going to go to an empty restaurant. And I think that's my Patreon. I'm too late to the game. Subscribe on Patreon. I'm too late to the game. I should have done this like 10 years ago. But again, I was technically scared about this. I was looking at what was going on, and I was I've been following it. I was looking at it and saying, someone like me needs there's my bag. Needs to be done by someone who knows what they're doing a little bit. But that's why I'm here. So you can help. If you want to help, you can do subscribe, start Patreon. Oh, send me money, please. I won't say no. You can find it where I am. Or you can buy my book. This is my recent 2022 book that I wrote. It's not a book, it's more of a study book. It's a guide. It's called Notebook for Aristotle's Politics. It is basically kind of cliff notes on the politics, where it gives you a guided outline of the various books and chapters of politics as a reader's guide and guide helping you when you're reading it to kind of understand it a little more and help get a better head. Nice charts and structurings, helping get a grip of the text. Sometimes questions arise and things like that. And it's a useful device, and you can do it. And if you buy it through Lulu, I'll okay, it's available Amazon everywhere else, and I understand why people do it, and I'll make some money from that. But if you buy it by Lulu, I get a bigger chunk of the thing. I get the bookstore's profit, and that's not that bad. Okay, it would be nice if more people bought some. I thought a lot of students would buy it. I think the 30. I think it's now $30, and therefore, it's too much money for this. It's not. It's not a commentary. Oh, I'm not going to do it. No, it would be. This is a use. If there was any way to make this cheaper and still get a little bit of money from it, um, I mean, originally the publisher wanted to like the original publisher that a couple. I had three books text things wanting to do it, and they wanted like to charge $100 for students, and I said no, 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 no. I want Lulu to kind of get as cheapest I could, and doing again. This is like 250 pages, right? It's like 200 texts, or even before the bibliography, 246 pages. Okay, this before that. It's well, okay, that's it. I better stop. I begged enough, and hope you're okay. And we'll see each other next time, and we'll look at book 6. Take care. Bye bye.